Brad Edwards. I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Thank you, Ryan. It was an unexpectedly busy day, I guess is what to call it, with the Kelly Bryant news this morning. We spent a lot of our morning reacting to that. So
what was your reaction?
I think this is something that we're all going to have to accept as normal within college football moving forward, but certainly the first cycle through, it's kind of surprising. Just like, last week, Auburn having some players quit the team. It's not something you're accustomed to seeing at this stage of the season, but I do think that it will be more common in the next few years to come. I think in this case, first of all, I applaud Dabo for making the move this week and not waiting one more week. He did give Kelly Bryant every opportunity to make this decision. He left the ball in his court to do what's best for him. And he did it. And it's not something that helps Clemson. I think we can all agree on that. And so for that reason, I think we all should acknowledge that Dabo did what was right for his player, not necessarily what was best for his team. Although I do think the move in the long term is the best move for Clemson, which is to change the starting quarterback. And look, I understand it. You remember very well what Jalen Hurts had to say early August when he was complaining about how no one had asked him what he thought about all this stuff and all this conversations going on about he's going to do this, he's going to do that, whatever. Well, the same thing has been going on with Kelly Bryant at Clemson, which is for the last half year or a little bit more, ever since Trevor Lawrence signed with Clemson. Everyone has been saying that he will eventually overtake Kelly Bryant and become Clemson's starting quarterback, and before the year was even out. And it was almost a foregone conclusion to everyone who followed Clemson. And Kelly Bryant's been reading this stuff. And so when it finally happened, when it finally became official that, okay, Trevor Lawrence is now the starting quarterback for this next game, I don't blame Bryant one bit for being upset about it and going under the assumption that this is it. This move has been made. It's not going back. And I also understand that as someone who is probably not a big-time NFL prospect and may only have, anywhere from 10 to, however many college football games left in his life to play, then it is a big deal. Do you want to do that standing on the sideline watching other people play, or do you want to go somewhere where you can actually enjoy playing the sport for several more games? And I think that's the decision he made. I think it's a great decision for him personally. It's not a great decision for Clemson, but I think we have to respect his decision.
Is there similarities that you see other than just a guy that's had success in Jalen Hurts here when we talk about skill set? Because you look at Kelly Bryant, he struggled throwing the football. And I think that's where you look at Clemson. They know that maybe this schedule's not going to be challenging. They got to find a way to throw the football. They got to find a way because there's a team in Tuscaloosa here that can throw the football, and I'm sure a lot of these eyes, even though they will never admit it, college football playoffs are coming, and you better be ready to go.
Yeah, look, I think if you believe that your team is capable of winning the national championship, then you're kind of forced to look at it from the Alabama angle, which is, are we good enough to beat Alabama? What would it take for us to beat Alabama if we actually got to play them? And for some of these teams, that means which quarterback would give us the best chance to do it. And I think if you're Clemson and you're looking down the road, you saw what happened last year with Kelly Bryant. Alabama was able to stop the run, and then there wasn't a lot for Bryant to do. Not a lot that he was able to do. And so, look, this is not to say that Lawrence would do any better, but I think that given what they believe his upside to be, that start to get him more reps now, and maybe by the time the playoff comes, their offense will be a lot more dynamic. And I think you can already see that, which is that their receivers are really good, and just as you've started to get a feel for how good Alabama's receivers are over the last few weeks, as you see the ball put into their hands in position to make yards after the catch more often, you get a sense of that. Well, I think you see that already with Clemson, what these guys are capable of doing if you get someone in there who can get the ball to them in the right spots. And I think that's entirely what this is about. It's about the future, and that's not just next season and beyond. That's the rest of this season. And so there are a lot of teams are kind of asking that question: what's it going to take for us to beat Alabama? And I think for most of them, it's going to require doing something just a little bit off the beaten path. I think as Peter Burns said on our podcast today, for most teams in college football, maintaining the status quo is not the way to beat Alabama. And so that's why we're seeing Clemson do this.
Brad, when you look at this Alabama football team, you're a guy that loves to research, love to compile numbers, look at different ways to look at the game of college football. Help Nick Saban out. He wants somebody to criticize his football team, man. That's what he told us. Can you provide some help to Nick Saban?
Yeah, look, if I were going to go tongue-in-cheek, I'd start looking at stuff like fourth quarter production, where they are one of the worst teams in the nation. Obviously, that's because all their starters are out at that point. But I will say this: there's one question I do have along those lines when it comes to depth, which is that on the front seven defensively, and you're paying more attention to this than I am because I'm watching a lot of games at once. But it doesn't seem to me that they're rotating as many players through those positions in the meaningful moments of the game. In other words, in the first half and especially the first quarter, when the games have actually been, there haven't been very many minutes that Alabama's games have been in doubt this season, so it's a little bit harder to define this. But you know where I'm coming from here. I don't think they're as deep at those positions, and that's fine when your starters aren't having to play but half the game. I just wonder if if you're leaving your starting defensive linemen and linebackers out there for the vast majority of snaps, once you get forced to play a 4-quarter game, how's that going to work? Are they going to be able to hold up, or are they going to be forced to put in guys who maybe aren't quite ready for that stage? I don't know. That's something I want to keep an eye on as we move forward. How many more reps do the backups in the front seven get? Because, like I said, right now it's fine because those guys don't have to play that many plays. But at some point, you got to believe that they're going to be in a game in the fourth quarter, and that's going to become a big deal. So that's one thing I would look at. Obviously, I'm sure you guys have beaten to death the situation with the punter. That needs to be better. But I mean, outside of that, you can cherry pick a few stats where situationally here and there they're not great, but I think at that point you're splitting hairs and you're really desperately searching for something.
Brad, I want to spend a little time talking about some other teams in the SEC. I was watching Georgia play Missouri on Saturday, sitting in the recliner, just watching a lot of college football throughout the day. And I didn't see a lot that looked like, a dominant championship caliber team. And maybe I'm just biased because I've watched this team in Tuscaloosa so much. But as you look at the Dogs, what do you see there in what Kirby Smart's got in 2018?
Yeah, I haven't watched all 4 of Georgia's games this year. I can tell you that was their worst performance. Now, Look, you could argue it's possible that was the best team they've played. I don't know whether Missouri might be better than South Carolina. We'll find that out over the next few weeks. But they definitely looked really sluggish offensively in the first half. And look, Missouri has a good quarterback and a good offense, and they did move the ball on Georgia a decent amount. So you kind of saw some stuff on both sides of the ball to lead you to believe that Georgia is not at the level that Alabama is right now. I look at their talent, though, and I see the potential, for them to give Alabama the type of game they did in the national championship game a year ago. Now, I also, in that game against Missouri, saw the potential for them to be in a dogfight in Baton Rouge in October. If they play that way at LSU, they might not come out of there with a win. But once again, I think that was kind of the exception with Georgia. I had not seen them play that poorly up to this point. But I think what it comes down to is that they are not as good at as many positions as Alabama is, and so their margin for error might not be the same. And that's kind of where I fall on them. And look, based on everything I've seen, there's a big drop off from Georgia to the next team in the SEC. So I think it's Alabama, and then, one notch below is Georgia, and then, a notch or two below that is the next few teams. And I really, where we sit right now, I don't see anyone challenging either one of them. I mean, that's not to say they might not be in a one-possession game at some point, but I'm not not only am I expecting Alabama and Georgia to both be undefeated going into the SEC championship game, I'm not expecting either one of them to really have to sweat the final 5 minutes of the game prior to then.
Are you buying LSU, or maybe when we see
No.
that they're ranked in the top 5, then maybe that's a reflection on where college football is currently?
I think it's also a reflection of what they've done resume-wise. I think they deserve to be ranked, maybe not all the way up to 5, but certainly in the top 10 based on who they've beaten. I mean, how many teams have really beaten two opponents as good as Miami and Auburn? Not many, if any. And so they deserve a high ranking because that matters, what you do on the field. But there's not anything about LSU when I look at them, that leads me to believe that this is a team that could, number one, get into the playoff, and two, would actually have a chance to beat someone if they did make the playoff. So I think the first thing for LSU, I mean, I could see this season going either way for them. I mean, I can see the very, very small percentage chance they might be able to knock off Georgia and possibly be in a situation where they're like 11-1, 10-2. But I also see the possibility that they could lose this week to Ole Miss or next week at Florida and still end up going like 7-5 when all's said and done, which is what a lot of people thought they were going to be before the season started. So I'm not there with LSU. I still have a lot of questions about their offense, and we kind of saw that last week when, after jumping out to an early lead, they stagnated against Louisiana Tech and almost came back to bite them. So I think they have a long way to go offensively for people to be putting them in the class of teams that's ranked up there around them in the polls right now.
What are the numbers when we talk about efficiency numbers for Auburn? When we talk about offensively, they look like they're a complete mess over there across the state. Is that showing up in the numbers as well?
That's a good question. I had not looked at that, but I can grab it as we're sitting here right now. What was the tweet that I saw the other day? I think it was someone was tweeting Jalen Hurts stats in comparison to Jarrett Stidham's, and
yes,
and I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
Yeah, but that,
well, no, it started with our intern. Somehow it got picked up on Twitter, but the lady that works behind our scenes here, she was publishing a stat, and she said Tua's got 12, Jalen Hurts has got 4. And Jarrett Stidham has 3 passing touchdowns, and somehow it made it all over Twitter. So it started here with the lady behind the scenes here.
Yeah, so I'm scrolling down right here. Offensive efficiency. Auburn is at 52nd in the nation. And look, we knew over the summer that they had a lot to replace on the offensive line, and that could be a cause for concern. I know some people might say, well, they played 2 pretty good defenses. Washington and LSU were are both pretty stout on that side of the ball. This efficiency stat takes into consideration the quality of the defenses you're facing or offenses you're facing. We're talking about defensive efficiency. It's opponent adjusting. And so for Auburn to be ranked 52nd just tells you they're not very good offensively right now. Now, I think we can go back to some previous Auburn teams and come up with some example. 2013 is the one that comes to mind. Now, granted, it was a little different because it was the first year with a new quarterback, Nick Marshall, where they weren't very good offensively at the start, and then all of a sudden they figured it out and they caught fire and obviously made a run to the national championship game. This is different because the quarterback's already in place. He already had a certain level of comfort there. Question is, how much better will they get? I don't know, but there's nothing I've seen from Auburn to lead me to believe that they're going to go on the road and beat either Georgia or Alabama. So I kind of look at Auburn right now as a best-case 9-3 team, and if they can't beat Mississippi State in Starkville, then you're probably looking at 8-4. Fortunately for them, the rest of the games look like they'd be pretty hard to lose, but you never know. I mean, we've seen some of these strange things happen in SEC play, but right now, Auburn does not strike me as a top 10 team.
Yeah, out of these top 9 teams, Penn State, Notre Dame, Stanford, Oklahoma, LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, Is there a team that we're not talking enough about that you think can make a push and be one of those last 4 teams standing?
Well, I think Penn State is the one that a lot of people kind of wrote off immediately after the scare they had with Appalachian State in week 1. And people will wake up and start talking about them again if they win on Saturday night. I give them a decent shot in that game. I will pick Ohio State because I think Ohio State's better on both sides of the ball. But the last 2 years, Penn State has made a lot of big plays on special teams and managed to hang in these games and won the one 2 years ago and kind of blew the lead last year. But being at home and having a really good quarterback, Penn State's got a shot. And I think they're a team that if they win this weekend, all of a sudden, people will start looking at them as the team that would be most likely to come out of the Big Ten. Now, do I consider them good enough to be a threat to win the national championship? Not at the moment. I think they're good enough to beat most teams in the country in Happy Valley in a night game, but I'm not liking them on a neutral field against some of the better teams out there. Now, one other team that I would say to keep an eye on is Notre Dame. If you look at this week's AP Top 25, there is one team in that poll that plays Notre Dame the rest of the year, and that's Stanford, which is who they play this weekend. So if Notre Dame wins on Saturday night, they have no remaining opponents that are ranked in the AP Top 25. Now, that's not to say that someone like USC, the last game, might not be back in the poll by the time they play them. But the point is, it's not a very tough, second half of the season for the Irish, the way that things have set up. The fact that Florida State, for example, is not very good. And so Notre Dame, as much as people are not talking about them right now, is another team that if they win this Saturday, they have, more so than Penn State, I think has a chance to be in the playoff at the end because they wouldn't have that many hurdles left to clear. And, we've spent so much time talking about the top 4 teams and how much they've dominated and how it kind of seems like it's these teams and everyone else. Well, if Notre Dame's sitting there undefeated, they're getting in the playoff. Everyone needs to accept that right now, which means that there's one fewer spot for all these other teams. So if you're an Alabama or a Georgia or Clemson, Ohio State, don't feel like you have a mulligan. I know a lot of these years so far that if you lose one game, you're like, okay, as long as you come back and win the conference, you're fine. One loss, you'll get in. Until some of these teams up top start losing games, I don't think you can just assume that being a one-loss conference champion is going to get you into the playoff this year, especially if you're Clemson, given the weakness of the ACC. I just don't think their schedule would help them very much with one loss either.
ESPN College Football Insider Analyst for College Game Day on ESPN Radio that you can hear here on Tide 102.9 throughout West Alabama and the majority of Tuscaloosa, with all of Tuscaloosa, the majority of West Alabama on ESPN Radio, part of ESPN Stats and Information Group. Connect with him, J. Brad Edwards, on the Twitter account. Brad, as always, thank you again for your time, and I hope you have a great afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity here in Tuscaloosa.
Ryan, I wish you the best over the next 4 weeks because you're going to have fun coming up with stuff to talk about. I'm glad I have other teams that I can turn to.
Hey, Arkansas
Alabama's games are not going to be very interesting.
You mean Arkansas's not a top 10 team?
You know what? The way when I was in school, I don't know what the rule is now, but when I was in school, I know that for SEC road games, you could only travel and dress 70 players, which means that for Arkansas and Tennessee, it could be worse than it is for everyone else because Alabama won't have all those walk-ons to put in the fourth quarter. They've only got 70 guys, and that means their better players have to play at the end. Maybe not their starters.
Sounds like an Alabama problem to me. Sounds like an Alabama problem to me. So
you got it.
Hey, Brad, I appreciate you, man. Have a great day.
All right, take care.